The loudest and most genuine laughter we have ever seen from BTS's Suga suddenly erupts in the middle of a wedding ceremony. Not on stage, not in a documentary, but here, right now, with RM and J-Hope beside him in a round table surrounded by candles and white flowers. And this isn't a polite chuckle or a faint grin, but an open, raw, unfiltered outburst of laughter that catches everyone around off guard and silences the air with a strange warmth. And the moment starts with something so casual. J-Hope muttering, "Hyung, do you remember when we got lost looking for a venue like this during the Busan concert?" To which RM quickly adds with a chuckle, "And you walked into a 7-year-old's birthday party?" And right then, without warning, Suga bursts into laughter, not holding back, not covering his face, not even caring who's watching. And what's more surreal is that no one in the room moves to interrupt, because everyone instantly senses that this is something rare, something incredibly intimate and real, a kind of moment that doesn't happen twice. And in that suspended second, it's like the whole energy of the wedding transforms from ceremonial to soulful, like a pocket of reunion blossoming in a room meant for vows and dances. And Suga, still laughing, slaps the table softly and says, "That was the most absurd moment of our tour. Seriously, I can't unsee it." We walked into a clown tent, sending another wave of laughter through their corner, including RM, who hides, his face in his hands, and J-Hope, who jumps up to mimic the little kid's walk. And just like that, the trio becomes the gravitational center of the room, a living reminder of how joy can resurface even when you least expect it. And though the wedding continues around them, many guests are now stealing glances, whispering things like, "Is that really Suga?" Because it's not just the laugh, it's the glow in his eyes, the animated way he leans forward, the unguarded calm in his shoulders, and it feels like something deep has been released, something heavy that was never meant to stay that long. And when a server offers them more drinks, Suga, still grinning, says with a half laugh, "Man, life is so weird sometimes." A comment that sends J-Hope into another round of giggles while RM shakes his head with a knowing smile. And you can tell by the glint in his eyes that he, too, is savoring a kind of relief. And then it happens. A bold guest, unable to contain their curiosity, leans in and asks, "Why are you laughing like this? Did you miss each other that much?" And Suga doesn't answer right away. He pauses, looking down for a beat, then lifts his gaze and says quietly but clearly, "It's the first time I've felt like there's no weight on me." And that single line shifts the entire air in the room, like an invisible curtain falling, exposing something beautifully raw. And before anyone can respond or ask what he means, RM suddenly stands up and points toward the far side of the hall with an excited voice. "Wait, who? Just walked in?" And all heads instinctively turn. And for a moment, the focus shifts completely as every eye in the room scans the entrance, following RM's pointed finger. But the lighting in that area is soft and golden, flickering slightly from the chandelier above, making it hard to see clearly who's arriving. Yet the collective tension of the room rises as if something significant is unfolding, and just as the crowd begins murmuring in low tones, J-Hope narrows his eyes and blurts out, with a grin, "No way is that?" and stops mid-sentence, leaving the rest hanging in the air while Suga, still wiping a tear from the corner of his eye from laughing too hard earlier, turns his head slowly, and when his gaze locks onto whoever just walked in, his smile doesn't fade. It widens, changes, becomes something softer, more reflective. And what's strange is that this entire shift happens without a word, as though everyone at the table simultaneously understands that the presence now stepping into the venue brings back something powerful, a connection perhaps even older than the group's fame. And in the seconds that follow, RM sits back down with a low exhale. "Didn't expect that," he mutters, and Suga simply nods once, his body leaning forward just slightly like someone preparing for an emotional impact he didn't ask for but welcomes anyway. And then, breaking the rising tension, J-Hope lets out a long, playful whistle and says, "Okay, this wedding just got interesting." And laughter bubbles again, but it's different now. Less wild, more nostalgic, layered with a tenderness that words can't catch up with. And a few guests begin inching their chairs subtly, trying to see better, trying to listen. Because even though the music resumes and the bride and groom continue their rounds, it's clear that the center of emotional gravity has not left this one table where these three men, Idols, legends, brothers are gathered, holding something more meaningful than any headline could capture, and Suga, still locked in that calm glow, whispers under his breath almost inaudibly, "This reminds me why we started." And RM glances at him with a softness that doesn't need explanation, because he knows exactly what that means, knows it in the tiredness they've all carried, in the silences they've all shared, and now, in the relief of being surrounded not by expectations, but by something that feels like home. And suddenly J-Hope leans in, tone shifting, voice a bit lower, "Hyung, you're different today." And Suga, without breaking eye contact with the scene unfolding at the entrance, replies in a voice so grounded it cuts through the noise, "Maybe I'm just finally breathing." And the honesty of that line causes an almost imperceptible shift in the air again, something only those at the table feel, and before anyone can respond, before any emotions fully settle, the figure at the entrance begins to walk toward them slowly, steadily, with a posture that suggests familiarity and purpose, and as they move closer, the expressions on RM, J-Hope, and Suga's faces shift once more. Not to surprise, not to confusion, but to a look that says this moment has been a long time coming, and just as the figure steps into the full light, revealing a face that none of them had seen in person for quite some time, the three of them go completely still, not out of shock, but as if time itself pauses to accommodate the weight of what's now right in front of them. Because walking toward the table with that calm, measured pace is someone who had once stood beside them through stadium lights, midnight rehearsals, and years of unspoken understanding. And though the world may not fully grasp the importance of this presence, the energy between them says it all, and the room, unknowingly complicit, gives space, quiets slightly, as if honoring the emotional density radiating from this brief reunion. And when the figure finally arrives, standing just beside the table, Suga is the first to react. He doesn't stand, doesn't rush. He simply looks up, holds the gaze, then lifts his glass slightly in a gesture that carries more emotion than any embrace. And the figure responds with a smile so understated and warm it hits like a memory that's been patiently waiting to resurface. And for the next few seconds, no one speaks, but everything is said. The way J-Hope's grin stretches wider but softer. The way RM tilts his head just a bit as if searching for something familiar in that face, and Suga just stares with a quiet relief, like something heavy has been peeled off without him even realizing he was carrying it. And then, finally, the figure breaks the silence with a voice that's not loud, but confident, steady, "Long time." And Suga exhales through his nose, a kind of laugh, a kind of sigh, and replies, "Yeah, but it doesn't feel like it." And the room starts breathing again, guests subtly returning to their conversations. But the intensity of what just happened lingers like a scent in the air, and someone from a nearby table leans toward a friend and whispers, "Did you see how they looked at each other?" Not realizing that what they witnessed wasn't about celebrity or fandom, but about people who've walked through fire together and are suddenly reminded they're not alone in that experience. And J-Hope, breaking the deep stillness, reaches for a fork and gently taps his glass 3 times. "We need a toast," he says, half joking, half serious, and RM, with that ever steady tone, adds, "Not for the wedding, not for the show, but for us." And so they lift their glasses, even the newcomer, all 4 of them now standing together, and clink quietly, and what follows isn't another round of loud laughter, but something deeper. Smiles shared with eyes only, small nods of acknowledgement. And in that brief burst of artificial light, something shifts. Not in the mood, not in the warmth that still cradles the table, but in the subtle awareness that reality is quietly returning, that the sacred bubble of privacy they had unknowingly created might be thinning. And though none of the 4 flinch or glance toward the source, their expressions reflect a quiet understanding, as if each of them recognizes the line that's just been crossed, the one between a moment for themselves and a moment now exposed to the world. And J-Hope, always the first to speak the unspoken, tilts his head just slightly and says under his breath, "One flash is all it takes." And Suga, still leaning back in his chair, eyes unmoving from the centerpiece of flickering candles in front of him, replies softly, "It's all right, as long as this stays here." Tapping his chest twice with his fingertips, and the newcomer, seated to his left, glances at him with a look of shared understanding, the kind only years of intertwined paths can create. and for a moment they all fall silent again, not awkwardly, but in reverence of everything this night has unexpectedly become, because what started as a wedding invitation turned into an emotional checkpoint. A reunion layered in laughter, memory, and quiet healing, and even RM, who's always had a way with words, doesn't say anything, because for once, there's nothing left to articulate, and maybe that's what makes this entire exchange so hauntingly beautiful. Its simplicity, its honesty, its refusal to be anything other than what it is, and yet even as they all sit there, rooted in the present, that subtle awareness begins to creep in that the moment may soon pass, that guests will begin to notice more, that phones may be raised again, that social media will catch the scent of something rare and chase it with ferocity, and as another flash lights up in the distance, Suga finally moves. He shifts forward slightly, places both elbows on the table, intertwines his fingers, and in a voice lower than before says, "We should go soon." Not with urgency, but with a sense of closure, of knowing that staying too long might dilute what has already become perfect in its imperfection. And J-Hope, eyes still glimmering, nods slowly, while Aram lets out a slow breath. "One more minute?" he says. "Just one more." And they all agree silently, soaking in these final seconds, and in that pause, with music floating faintly in the background and guests now openly stealing glances, the four of them smile. Not for the crowd, not for the cameras, but for each other, for everything unspoken, for everything endured in Suga, that same man who had burst into the purest laughter at the start of this night. Now wears an expression so serene, so completely at peace, it's disarming, and then a shadow crosses the table as someone approaches. Not just any guest, not a stranger, but someone familiar with their rhythm, their past, and the moment. Their footsteps stop beside them. All four turn slowly in unison, and the air thickens again.